Hello students, this is K Sandhya, Assistant Professor of Chemistry, MATRUSRI Engineering College, and I'm going to continue with the previous session that we had with the introduction of chemical fuels in this session. Let's talk about few more topics regarding chemical fuels in this topic. Now we'll majorly focus about the advantages and disadvantages of different forms of fuels that we have, like the solid, liquid and gaseous fuels. Now coming to the advantages and disadvantages of solid fuels in specific, we'll talk about a few advantages as well as disadvantages both on the sides. Now the advantages of solid fuels are, now solid fuels, as you know, they are easy to transport. Most of the solid fuels are usually moved from one place to another using goods trains. You can use by means of ship or by means of road. So it is very easy to transport solid fuels without any fire hazards, or usually they are more safe to transport. They are convenient to store without any risk of spontaneous explosion, as I have already told you. Usually, in order to ignite the solid fuel, it is usually taking more amount of ignition temperatures compared to liquid and gaseous fuel. It is not so spontaneous in its combustion reaction. It takes its own time to set its ignition and allow the combustion reaction to occur. And apart from that, the cost of production of solid fuel is usually low. So the cost of processing or the cost of extraction of this fuel from the natural resources is usually considered to be low compared to the other forms of fuels, that is liquid and gaseous fuels. And apart from that, they possess moderate ignition temperatures. As I have already told you, the ignition temperature should neither be low nor should be high. So ignition temperatures, when they are moderate, they would be properly utilized and they would not cause any fire hazards. It is easy to handle such kinds of fuel forms. So these are set of advantages of solid fuels. Now let's talk about disadvantages. Now the disadvantages of solid fuels, as you already know, it tends to actually form a non-combustible residual matter at the end of combustion reaction, that is ash content. The ash content is high when it is burnt completely, and also lot of heat is wasted during combustion reaction. Now during combustion reaction, as I told you, a lot of heat is utilized in driving the non-combustible matter as well. So it has low thermal efficiency, and also it has to have another problem in dealing with clinker formation. Now, as you know, the ash particles would fuse together to form lumps of ash. This is called as clinker, and during the combustion process, when fusion temperatures are attained, the clinker formation results, and when the clinkers are formed, naturally what happens is these clinkers which are formed over the above surface would not allow proper air circulation to the rest of the fuel that is present for combustion, and therefore lack of air supply to the rest of the fuel would actually lead to incomplete combustion and therefore leading to inefficiency of the fuel. So combustion operations cannot be easily controlled. This is another aspect that we face from solid fuels. Usually liquid fuels or gaseous fuels, the combustion can be immediately stopped at the time when it is not required by stopping the supply of the fuel. But it's not the same case with solid fuels. Solid fuels combustion reaction cannot be controlled so easily, and so that is one among the disadvantages with the solid fuels. And apart from that, because it has lot of residual matter remaining after the combustion reaction is complete, okay, then the handling of this residual matter, that is, someone has to you need to engage more labor to handle this residue after the whole reaction is complete. And it has comparatively low calorific value when compared to liquid and gaseous forms of fuel. Usually anthracite has about 8,800 kilocalorie plus approximately of calorific value, whereas when it comes to liquid fuel it has about 11,600 plus calorific value, depending upon the refined form of petrol that is available, or whether it is diesel or kerosene, it is comparatively high. And similarly in gaseous fuels it's about 14,000 kilocalorie per kg or meter cube. So we have high efficiency of the fuel when compared to the liquid solid fuel. So solid fuels are usually less efficient. The calorific value of the very efficient form of solid fuel is recorded to be less than the liquid forms and gaseous forms. And then excess of air supply that is required is also more for solid fuels. So you need to have sufficient supply of air for proper combustion reaction, else it leads to incomplete combustion, and amount of air that is required for burning the solid substance is usually considered to be more. So this is one among the disadvantages. And apart from that, it cannot be used in internal combustion engines. These fuel forms can be used only in external combustion engines. That is, usually you find the steam engines which are totally designed as external combustion engines. So these are usually hard to manage as internal combustion fuel forms, because you have a lot of residual matter that remains at the end of the combustion reaction, so they cannot be included in using as an internal combustion engine fuel. So these are certain limitations or disadvantages of solid fuels. So over solid fuels, when we talk about liquid fuels, they are considered to be the better forms in its handling and usage and efficiency as well. So let's talk few advantages of liquid fuels. They have higher calorific value per unit mass than solid fuels, and then they burn without forming any ash or clinkers, or they do not emit dust during the combustion reaction. And apart from that, the firing is easier, and also fire can be extinguished easily by stopping the liquid fuel supply. So as I told you, you can easily control the combustion reaction when you're using either liquid or gaseous fuel when compared to solid fuels. And apart from that, you can easily transport these liquid fuels through pipelines. Okay, and the number of manual to regulate this process can also be less. Okay, so it is easily regulated by a large number of furnaces simultaneously, so one person can manage the whole handling process. They can be easily stored indefinitely without any loss. So this is another advantage of liquid fuels. Proper containers that are used, they can actually be stored safely and they can be utilized properly. The flame produced by burning liquid fuels can be easily be controlled by adjusting the liquid fuel supply, as already discussed before. And then they're more clean and economic in terms of labor. The residue that is formed at the end of the combustion reaction is usually less compared to solid fuels. So they are more economic when compared to solid fuels in terms of engaging the manual labor. And also the loss of heat to chimney is very low due to greater cleanliness. Now if you observe in most of the rural areas, those who are still using with the solid fuels like coal or the wood, you must have observed that the kitchen is equipped with a chimney, a very long chimney which moves out of there, which actually helps out in removing the farmed dust, or you can say the smoke that is evolved from by burning the solid fuel is moving out, and there's a lot of heat loss during this process actually. And so you can actually reduce the heat loss from the chimney as well. There is great amount of cleanliness maintained at the place of work, and the labor that is engaged in managing this fuel is also less. So these are certain set of advantages. Apart from that, compared to solid fuels, the amount of air that is to be supplied for the proper combustion, the complete combustion, is also less. So apart from that, no wear and tear, because it's not a solid fuel. Usually the wear and tear of great bars and cleaning of fires, etc., is usually less when compared to solid fuels. So these are the main advantages. Other than that, the liquid fuels can be engaged in running the internal combustion engines. Today we see a lot of internal combustion engines run with liquid fuels like petrol, diesel, etc. Your automobile engines are usually the internal combustion engines, so they can be conveniently run with the use of fuel forms which are totally liquid in nature. So these are the advantages, and let's discuss about few disadvantages of liquid fuel. The cost of liquid fuel is relatively much higher as compared to solid fuels. Now the cost is more because of their comparatively less abundance in our country, and apart from that, the processing of liquid fuel is usually of more cost. Costly special storage tanks are required for storing the liquid fuels. Now when you compare the storing equipment that is required for solid and liquid fuels, it is usually observed that if you are taking a solid fuel, any dry conditioned space is sufficient for it. Though the space occupied by solid fuel is more, the dry conditions when they are maintained at the place are sufficient for storing it properly, and you don't find any fire hazards occurring at the place easily when you are storing the solid form of fuels. Whereas for liquid fuels, you need to have proper storage tanks engaged. Okay, so that's again a cost affair which is comparatively more than the solid form of fuels. There is a great risk of fire hazards compared to solid form of fuels, because you can see in mostly the summers there is more likely fire accidents occurring due to the volatile nature of petrol. Usually the volatility of petrol is considered to be almost at the room temperature. So greater amount of fuel can actually go as waste when such fire accidents are occurring due to its volatility. So the volatile nature of the fuel is actually reducing its possibility of using it much safer. They have bad odor. This is another disadvantage of the liquid fuels. Usually when you just go to the petrol bunks, you can see such strong odor that is coming out from the bunks with complete equipped liquid fuel forms, that is petrol and diesel. So they have lot of odor that is affected with the area where it is stored and where it is used. And for sufficient burning of liquid fuels, specially constructed burners and spraying apparatus are supposed to be used. Now these apparatus are usually to be designed in such a way that there is proper utility of these liquid fuels without any problem. That is, without any fire hazards caused at the place. Especially when choking of sprayers is occurring, it's actually leading to a drawback of oil firing. So it immediately sets fire at the place and may cause serious conditions or serious fire problems. Now let's talk about few advantages of other form of fuels that we have, that is gaseous forms of fuels. Like basically much in usage of gaseous fuels that we have in day-to-day life is CNG and LPG. Now these CNG and LPG gases can conveniently be moved from one place, that is transportation is from one place to another through pipelines, and thereby you can actually have very easy transportation without using much of a manual labor, and then it is lighted at moment's notice, that is you can ignite very easily, and they have high heat content and hence help us in having higher temperatures. Like you find you can have LPG having a calorific value of about 27,000 odd of kilocalorie per meter cube, That's very high compared to the solid and liquid form of fuels. So the heat content possessed by the gaseous fuels is usually high, and if you observe, the carbon content is comparatively less. They have high calorific value, and then the preheated by the heat of hot waste gases, thereby affording economy in heat. That is, they can have a proper convection of heat that is generated, so it is having more economy in managing the heat of the gaseous fuels. And then apart from that, the combustion can be readily controlled for changes in demand like oxidizing or reducing atmospheres, length of the flame, temperatures, etc. So as we must observe in the equipment that we use in maintaining the LPG at home, that is your regular stoves, you can actually have easy control of switching on and off, as well as use sim the gas, isn't it? So to reduce the flame, so it can be easily managed to control the combustion rates, and hence it is easy to handle the combustion reaction. It can be easily controlled. Burn without any soot, and ash content is not to be seen. There is no labor involved in ash handling, etc. So if you find with solid, you have lot of wastage in the form of ash at the end of the combustion reaction, whereas when it comes to liquid, it is majorly having soot formation with the flame. At the edge of the flame, you can see the lot of smooth soot that goes off, especially when you have the kerosene utility. You can see that a lot of soot is evolved during the combustion reaction. It's less comparatively when you're using petrol and diesel. Okay, so the soot formation is also very less in case of burning the gaseous forms of fuels. So less residual matter, less of labor in handling it. So these gaseous forms of fuels have several advantages. That is, they're very clean to be used. So unlike even liquid fuels, gaseous fuels do not have even the possibility of spilling around, or they do not have any possibility of having the ash formation or soot formation like we see with the other two forms of fuel. Okay, so they are very clean in use, do not require any special burners, and they have complete combustion without pollution. And this is due to the proper uniform mixing of air and fuel. You can see that when you have this content of gaseous fuel, it mixes readily with the air. So amount of air supply that is required for proper combustion of gaseous fuels is very less, because it readily mixes with air. So it can have a uniform combustion rate, and it can burn efficiently with less amount of air supply. Burn without heat loss due to convection currents in slight excess of air supply. This is what I was talking about. The efficiency of heating process is much more in gaseous fuel compared to liquid and solid forms. Free from solid and liquid impurities. You can see that gaseous fuels have less impurities engaged, because in case of solid and liquid fuels, you can see sulfur and nitrogen compounds that may be present, the elemental forms that can be associated with the solid and liquid fuels can be nitrogen and sulfur, whereas in case of gaseous fuels, we do not find the possibility of much of the contaminants like sulfur and nitrogen, etc. So less possibility of contaminants. And of course, when they are used in metallurgical preparations, like for instance, you have the blast furnace, which is used in extraction of iron from its ore, isn't it? So there, when you are using coal as the fuel, what happens is, coal, when it consists of sulfur, sulfur is combustible matter. The sulfur may have a possibility of combining with the iron that is formed during the process, and during the extraction process, when this sulfur gets involved, or when it intervenes with the reactions in the metallurgical process, it is actually leading to impurity of the extracted metal. So such kind of possibilities are reduced when gaseous fuel is used in metallurgical processes. So that's major advantage of gaseous fuel. And also they can be used in running the internal combustion engines. You have the fuel forms like LPG and CNG, which are used in running the automobiles these days. You must have seen few car models which actually say that they have green. They are green, and I mean, you can see the labels over there on the car models as green. That is, they have more possibility of causing less pollution, and they are utilized in running the automobile engines. So these kind of internal combustion fuels, which are usually used in cars or any other motor forms, are actually leading to less pollution as well. If you see the carbon content that is present in gaseous fuel, it is less compared to the solid and liquid forms of fuels. Usually liquid fuels, say for instance you have petrol, it has minimum of C8, C5 to C8 content of carbon molecules. Whereas in gaseous fuels, it's just from about C1 to C4. In CNG, it is most likely with methane or as the major constituent. So the carbon that is utilized over here is of less content, and less pollution is possible with the gaseous forms of fuels. So we can conveniently use them in running the internal combustion engines, and you can see that they have more efficiency and less cause of pollution, and so this is of greater advantage. And let's look into the disadvantages of gaseous fuels. The first and foremost disadvantage of gaseous fuel is very large storage tanks are required, or you can see the setup of the storage equipment for gaseous fuel is quite costly, because you need to maintain stringent temperatures as well as pressures. You can see the cylinders at home are actually maintained under pressure, isn't it? Similarly, most of the gaseous fuels have to be maintained under stringent temperatures and pressure conditions. So, the equipment used for storage is usually of cost. They are highly inflammable, so chances of fire hazards are high in their use. So this is also another major disadvantage that we encounter with the usage of gaseous fuel. Because they readily mix with air, there is more chances of causing more damage during the process of combustion. So fire hazards are largely causing more loss due to its highly inflammable nature. So if at all you have the cylinder undergoing any kind of leakage at domestic levels, these are most of the fire accidents that we encounter. You must have observed in several newspapers, right? So the damage that occurs at a place is very huge, because the combustion is very taking place at a rapid rate. At the same time, it is actually non-controllable at those instances. When it starts spreading out to the whole area, it readily mixes with air and have an uncontrollable levels of combustion reaction. So this is one major disadvantage of using a gaseous fuel. The more costly as compared to solid and liquid fuels. Now, these gaseous fuels are usually having more cost, because the extraction process and their utility process is also costing high. So we have discussed in this particular video about the advantages and disadvantages of various forms of solid, liquid and gaseous fuels, and we have uh, talked in general about how actually these solid, liquid fuel and gaseous fuels would vary with their properties. Okay, thank you.